Hey everybody, and welcome to a casual game interview, would you believe? And I have the absolute pleasure of hosting the lovely Darren O'Mahony from Dare Media. Darren, how are you?
Hey, how you doing, man? How are things?
Not too bad, not too bad. All the better for seeing you, my friend. Darren, you came onto my radar in an interesting way. Essentially, we both have a shared friend in one Eugene Darcy, but more importantly, through a kind of a conversation with Eugene, I had been put onto the fact that you have done some very impressive work for a very recent game that I know myself I have spent many an hour in, which is Assassins Creed Valhalla. Specifically, you and your team had put together a trailer of sorts for the Wrath of the Druids DLC.
Yeah, we initially kind of wanted to do one for the initial Assassin's Creed Valhalla initial launch, but through COVID and everything else, and just the sheer kind of, I suppose, the amount of complexity in it, it ended up kind of getting put to one side. And then suddenly Wrath of the Druids was announced, and I kind of thought, well, we're Irish, we're here.
Yeah,
Surely we could do along those lines, you know?
completely.
And kind of went with it.
Yeah, completely. And that's what really stood out to me when I first heard about it, because I don't know how it didn't come across on my YouTube feed before that point, because looking at it, it has gotten quite a number of views at this point, and congratulations to you and the team on that. But and also to anybody, of course, that wants to check this out, there will be links in the description below, and if you're watching us here on YouTube, you'll of course see it, down below. But I guess let's start at the beginning here, Darren. So tell us a little bit about yourself. You're obviously, video, filmography, that kind of thing is obviously a passion of yours. But do you want to tell us a little bit more about maybe where you're from, what your background is, and kind of how you got started down this road of creative game media?
Okay, so I'd be a videographer by trade. I suppose I went to film school, which is kind of a dying art at this stage. But I went to film school when I was younger. Ended up working in a shop. Absolutely hated it for years, and then ended up starting a production company where I just was like, you know what, I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna throw it out there and risk it. And I've been doing kind of corporate videos, commercials, wedding videos, everything and anything I could kind of get my hands on for the last 5-6 years. And it's fun, and I mean, there's different kind of elements there that you'd kind of like and enjoy. But I've kind of missed doing the more creative film work.
Of course, yeah.
And like, I'd be a gamer anyway. Like not a massive gamer, sadly, because of the hours that I do with the real work and everything. But it just kind of came across to me. I whenever a game would release and you'd look at the trailers and the cinematic trailers, I'd always be looking at it going, okay, well, how could you do that in real life?
Yes.
If it was a CG trailer, and be kind of like, oh, well, what would I need to do that? And then eventually I was like, you know what, sure, I need to go out and actually do some of these. And then about, I'd say maybe a year and a half ago, the idea kind of came into my head to start doing a couple of these. And the first one that kind of came up was one for Call of Duty.
Yes.
Warzone was kind of on the radar at that stage. It was kind of being hinted at by an awful lot of people. So myself, Eugene, and a few other guys went down to Spike Island in Cork and basically turned the prison into Fallujah for a couple of which worked out quite well. I mean, there's a lot of kind of flaws to it, and it was our first attempt, but I think I'm quite happy with how it looks.
I did want to ask you about that one. I had obviously ahead of our talking, I wanted to familiarize myself more with just not just the Assassin's Creed content, but I know there's others that you'll probably talk on, but the Call of Duty one. I found that to be it was, maybe it's because I myself live in Cork, so on Cork, Ireland, I guess, to anybody who may be international, but to me, having that familiarity with Spike Island, like that really made that video for me personally, you know. And then taking a step back, I could see that, like, wow, actually, you know, if given the foresight, you know, if these companies were to really give the reins of these types of, you know, promotional materials to people in your type of situation, like what you had created, although I'm sure you can pick out every flaw under the sun, to me who had never seen it before, all I saw was a kind of a raw take on what is obviously quite a raw subject, you know. And to me, I thought it all worked fantastically, especially considering it seemed to be at least your first released piece of video game content like that.
Yeah, it was. I mean, like it's funny because when I threw it out, um, like obviously, yeah, I see the flaws and everything else in it, but when I threw it out there, and I posted it up and things like that, loads of people thought it was real, which was funny because I never, I like now when I put anything out, I always make a point of saying unofficial or fan made or something like that, just to kind of, you know, clear the air with the legal people more than anything else. But with that first one, it was funny because I threw it out and there was a couple of hashtags on it, and I put Warzone as a hashtag on it, and next thing someone spotted it, and there was a couple of people. Next thing I knew, there was a video on YouTube talking about how there was an upcoming live action trailer for Warzone coming out. And the guy had never contacted me or anything. You know, there was no form of communication. If he'd asked, I would have just said, no, it's fan made. But he went and he ran with it. And he had the bones of like 20,000 views on the video within like a day. And I was getting all these random messages from people in foreign countries just going, Warzone? Question mark? You know, kind of assuming that I knew what was going on.
Yeah.
And funny because one of the lead actor, I don't know if you know Pat Fitz. He'd be a musician in Cork,
sure,
but he played the lead role. And one or two people saw a side profile picture of him and thought it was Liev Schreiber, and it grew legs. And I ended up spending about 3 days just kind of putting out these messages saying, guys, this isn't you know, live action featuring Liev Schreiber, you know. But it was funny because in a way it was a compliment because it meant that the quality was, obviously we had enough visual quality there for people to look at it and not think anything of it, which was great. Because you know, there's a lot of fan material, and especially when people are starting out, it can look a bit poor. So I was lucky that we got a bit lucky in that sense, you know.
Yeah, 100%. And you know, I as somebody who makes, you know, hobbyist content, I guess, personally, like I can completely get that, and I would never be of the sort to ever discourage anyone, because I know myself what it is like to, you know, start off, and there's going to be rough edges and a lot to figure out and stuff like that. But I do agree with you. Whenever you hear, oh, fan made trailer of such a thing, you kind of you will almost immediately start rolling your eyes and go, okay, I'll watch it or whatever. But when I was watching the Dare Media stuff, I have to say, having started straight away with the one that we're probably going to dive into the most, being the Assassin's Creed Valhalla Wrath of the Druids trailer, like the level of professionalism is striking, you know. And in fact, I had to do a little bit of research to see, like, are these guys connected here? is there funding coming in here? Because it was that good. It genuinely is. So I can see why when you put these things out that there is a level of, okay, we have to manage the messaging and the narrative that goes out around this a little bit, just because, you know, yes, we're not technically hurting anyone, but we all know that the internet can take something and run with it, you know. So I guess before we kind of jump into the actual the big ticket item, which is your most recent release of the Assassin's Creed trailer, I guess that's just something I wanted to ask about, is like, do you find that managing the internet is kind of a part of these projects? You know, do you find that, like you said there, it was almost 2 days of putting out fires after that first one? Do you find that there is still an element of like trawling message boards, or like, I don't know, going on to, let's say, Ubisoft's Twitter or what have you, just to see, like, are there people reacting do I need to step in at any point, or has now the fact that you kind of put up there, fan made or whatever, enough to kind of quell those fires naturally?
People don't read descriptions.
I thought as much. This is why I'm asking.
There's still a lot of it. I do make a point now to have in there on any post that it's fan made or that it's unofficial. But yeah, you do get people still from time to time, and generally now, thankfully, nobody has rang with it like that initial one. And most of the feedback has always been good. But every so often you'll get comments from people saying stuff like, "Oh, when are you going to put in one-handed swords and stuff like this?" As though I'm actually I'm Ubisoft. I'm the development team.
Well, Darren, I'm delighted we finally get the opportunity. When are you putting in that one-handed sword? The people need to know, damn it. But no, that is hilarious. And I guess a question that kind of goes along with that is, how much involvement, if any, do these companies have when you guys take on these projects? Is it solely just you guys? Do you put any kind of flags up in their direction to say, hey, we're an Irish team, you've got an Irish DLC, we've got access to all this equipment, we're going to go out and do this thing, do you fancy being a part of it? Is there any back and forth, or do you guys solely take this on yourself?
With the initial one, no, there was nothing. I didn't have any contact with them at all. The last 3 or 4 videos have been Ubisoft based games, just not by design, but it just happened that they flowed into each other. And I would have some contacts kind of within the community management area. But there's been for the Wrath of the Druids one, I mean, I asked for information, I asked for help, I was told no. It's plain and simple. Which I do get, because I'm still at the stage where they don't know me.
Of course.
I'm just this random guy, like you said earlier, I'm just this random guy saying I'm making a live action trailer, and that they're just kind of probably rolling their eyes at it, and they get 50 requests a day. So no, there's never been any official involvement or anything like that.
Sure. And it is funny you say that, because we obviously, from a very grassroots perspective, whenever we reach out to these big companies, to say that they don't come back isn't necessarily even a slight. It is just a case of as you mentioned, 50 other people have come through the door that day, or through their email inbox, more accurately, to say something very similar, request that, and it's all time, it's all resources, and it's all, it's only so many hours in a day, and we all get that. But yeah, your plight is felt.
Yeah, I mean, no. In fairness to them, that there's been discussion there with the various kind of reps that you can talk to and everything else. So they have been quite good in that level, in that there is a dialogue. But I mean, obviously it has to get fed up the chain then to whoever handles,
Precisely.
Information, and who handles budgets and everything else. So I mean,
of course,
that's kind of where it dies a death.
Of course, but having seen your catalog of what you guys have available now, I would be shocked if you were to approach, any companies in the future with this kind of a back catalog to say hey, yeah, this is kind of what we do, and not have them at least take note if in fact they watch, but to that end, I guess let's jump right into it if that's okay. So I wanted to kind of ask you about the whole process of the Wrath of the Druids trailer, because it's probably the most interesting. Number one, because of course it's from a very recent release, it's focusing on that DLC that is appended to last Christmas's Assassin's Creed game, a game which I have personally spent about 60 odd hours in, and I know that my casual Gamecast host Shane also has put roughly the same amount of time in there. So 120 hours between the two of us is good going, and we're both looking forward to jumping into the DLC. But things have kind of gotten in the way in terms of getting that time, like you spoke about earlier. But very much looking forward to it, because I'm hearing fantastic things. But that DLC itself is of course set in Ireland. you are an Irish, film. I can't actually say that word for whatever reason. A filmographer.
Just say filmmaker. It's fine.
Filmmaker. Oh, there we go. Perfect. Anybody that knows the podcast knows I trip up over myself all the time. But as an Irish filmmaker, like, was this just kind of like, here's a great opportunity? We've been making these videos for a little while now, we skipped over, but you have done a number of Ghost Recon ones as well. Moving on then into Assassin's Creed, and then here's our moment to shine, one that's set on our back door. Was that the kind of approach, or were you always going to do something with this?
Initially, like, once I saw the initial reveal trailer for Valhalla, I really, it was the animated / CG one. I really wanted to do something, and I had a script there that would kind of play with that, but COVID was kind of, I was going to say at its height, but still kind of is. But I mean, COVID had us in kind of in and out of lockdown for forever. So trying to get anything organized just wasn't the flyer. And all my previous videos had all been military themed. So I had guns, I had uniforms and things like that for those. So they were I don't want to say easy, but they're more straightforward to do. Whereas this was the first one where all the costuming was different. You suddenly needed swords, axes, everything else. So that kind of fell by the wayside a bit. And I had kind of started the planning, and then I just ended up parking it because it wasn't going to happen anywhere near the kind of release time. And I kind of realized from some of the other trailers that to get a decent audience, you kind of have to hit that sweet spot around the kind of week or two around the launch. Yeah. Because otherwise viewer interest just kind of drops off a cliff. Completely. Realistically. So I just parked that. A couple of months passed. I was kicking myself the whole time I hadn't done something, because the game was out, it was doing great, really good game, and next thing they announced we're out of the Druids, and I was like, well, it's here.
Yeah.
It's if ever there was a sign to actually do a video on this one, then this was kind of it. So I got back into planning. I asked them about could we possibly get some concept art, because the only image we had to work on was that initial kind of picture of the couple of Druids standing by a fire, So I'd send a couple of very nice polite messages. Could I get some concept art, possibly, please? Was politely told no, which was fine. So we just had that image to kind of work off, and then kind of work from there. And luckily enough, the Art of Druids was delayed by 3 weeks or a month, the actual release of it, which bought us extra time at the end, because otherwise we might not have been able to do it.
Interesting.
So yeah, just that was kind of how the idea kind of came about, and I really wanted to get it done. I felt it had to be the female Eivor as opposed to the male.
Yeah, can we park on that for a moment? And I think this is probably the first piece of, and I realize it's not officially sanctioned, but I think this is the first piece of media on the game I've seen that wasn't simply displaying that, hey, you can choose one or the other. Like, generally, a lot of the marketing in the media has been focused on the male portrayal of Eivor, which I thought was interesting, considering the last game, which I believe was AC, not Origins, it was the one in between, but the one that was set in Greece. Thank you, Odyssey. The one Odyssey, the female protagonist in that game was heralded as, much like Mass Effect, to be, this is the way you play this game. Don't even think about being the male one, because the female one is so much better in terms of character, in terms of just sheer energy or whatever. So when I heard that the female was going to be an option again in Valhalla, I thought, oh, well, it's be silly of them not to lean into that. But surprisingly, they haven't. It is very much the male Eivor, almost representing that History Channel Vikings, protagonist. You know, really just going in on what was kind of popular at the time, I guess. But watching your trailer, the second I see it, and people watching on YouTube can see it down below right now, and if you're listening to it at home, it's in the description for you to watch. But you'll be struck immediately by a pretty on the ball female Eivor, you know, on top of her steed, and immediately I was kind of more hooked in. I go, oh, finally, here's some media on probably the more interesting of the two characters.
Yeah, I just like, when it comes to all doing the trailers and things like that, like or just playing games in general, I'm big on story. Probably from being a filmmaker, like if a game doesn't have a solid story, I tend to lose interest in playing it very, very quickly. Sure. And I mean, like when it came to Valhalla, I mean, if you're going by the actual canon, and if you're going by even the name being a girl's name, I mean, it kind of lends itself purely down that road.
It does a bit, yeah.
And I mean, like I know there's kind of twists and turns and everything else, but at the same time, that is the actual direction, you know. So like for me, that was kind of a no-brainer. I kind of had to do that, and as well, I mean, like you said, with all the marketing going purely for the male, I mean, they released they released a trailer with female Eivor, which was literally just a reheaded copy of the other trailer, you know. And I remember looking at it, and they made a big hullabaloo about it, saying, "Oh, you know, this is the female trailer," and it was like, it's the exact same trailer. You just literally copied on a different head onto the body, you know.
Sure.
So just personally, I thought, look, you know, fair is fair. I mean, you have to really push that route. Yeah. So I mean, I know Sinead, the actress, for many years, and like she fits that perfectly to me.
Yeah,
I mean,
really strikingly.
Yeah, I mean, so it was a case of I had two pictures in front of me. I had a picture of Eivor, I had a picture of Sinead, who's actually dark haired.
And you got them mixed up, and then you had to put them back.
Put them back, you know, dye her hair blonde, give her a scar, sorted, you know.
Yeah.
And literally, I sent her the image, and I said, you know, would you be up and playing this part? And she was like, it's the head off me, so I'm going to go for it, you know. Plus, she always kind of wanted to do a kick-ass kind of role as well, so we went for it, and I think it worked out well. I'm very happy. And the funny thing is, I mean, I know that there was a lot of, sometimes online you get an awful lot of people making comments, oh, it should be the man or it should be the woman, or, you know, this, that, or the other. The funny thing is, with all the kind of the feedback and everything we've gotten on the trailer, not one person has ever mentioned that it's a woman, you know. It's just been accepted. It's just part, you know.
Yeah.
Which is great, which is how it should be, you know.
Exactly. No, 100%.
And hopefully if we do another one, then we'll kind of continue that story on.
Yeah, geez, and I really hope you are. I guess that's kind of where my next question was going to come in, and I guess it's a good time to ask it, is do you plan on continuing? Because I know that we've just covered off Wrath of the Druids, which is set, you know, in and around Dublin, or I guess the Pale of Ireland a little bit. But do you plan on
Never came south, I don't get that.
Yeah. We've done a interview in the past with Danny O'Dwyer, if you're familiar. And I'm listening to Danny on, I believe it was the Giant Bombcast recently, where he was saying he was very upset that they didn't go to Wexford and Waterford and you know, places where Vikings had a massive stronghold in Ireland, you know. But you got to give people Dublin. You know. But speaking of which, you know, is there plans to continue on with the Viking series in the way you've done with Wrath of the Druids? Do you plan on doing I believe the Siege of Paris is their next outing?
Yeah, initially there was no plan to go on. Initially it was just going to be this one. And you know, we went off, we made the Druids masks and everything else, and we did all that. And it was supposed to be a standalone piece. And I was already kind of planning moving on to something else. But the reaction's been so good, and I think just generally the cast and the crew kind of really enjoyed it and got on so well, that it's kind of been. I think it would be a shame not to. Like I know Siege of Paris takes it outside the country again, and we're going off to a different location. But I think it could be something really cool as well. I will be going back to Ubisoft, going, tapping them on the shoulder, going, "Can we get some money now?" And see. But yeah, definitely. I think Siege of Paris is where I'd like to go. It's a case of, again, I don't know when that DLC is releasing, so I have no idea when my target is for or anything like that.
Sure.
UB Forward is on Saturday, so maybe we'll get a bit of information then as to when, and to whether it's actually feasible to get something done within the time frame.
Sure.
But fingers crossed, yeah, Siege of Paris will be the next one.
And that is something that I genuinely hope that when we get this information on Saturday, this is obviously recorded just ahead of all of the E3 shenanigans. I hope we do get enough time, because I would be very excited to see a follow-up to this, personally. But just to kind of touch on what I think is kind of interesting, but I guess I'm kind of hesitant to ask because it'll probably date this interview, but I gotta, is you'd mentioned it earlier. This trailer in particular, I'm not sure about your earlier ones, but this trailer in particular happened in the midst of COVID-19, in the world pandemic, and it wasn't in the before times, it was in the new now, and when I was watching it, and I watched the behind the scenes video, which is also excellent, and that will also be linked in the description below for anybody that wants to look at that. But I couldn't help but notice that it was masks on, steps being taken. How did you find that whole process? Because creating something in a kind of guerrilla fashion like that, you're obviously having to take in all these new considerations that before, you're not, when you're dealing with recording something on the fly in the woods, in a field or whatever, you don't really get all the same hang-ups as, let's say, a studio production would. There's no health and safety, there's no guide wires, there's no what have you. Whereas now, the world has kind of forced some kind of, restrictions on top of you guys, where you kind of had to be aware of each other and restrictions and what have you. How did you find that experience?
Yeah, you have to follow. I mean, it doesn't matter whether it's indoor or outdoors or big budget or no budget or whatever. It's kind of, you have to. It's people's health, so you do have to kind of follow that. And I mean, it was something to be very, very conscious of. I mean, even in terms of people going to the various locations, it was a case of limiting how many people are in a car, calculating how many cars you had, per people. If John goes in the car with Tom, does somebody else go in the back, or what way do you work it? Or, does someone sit in the front, sit in the back? And then you're getting to the location. I mean, we're lucky enough in that, it was all outdoors as well, which kind of took a little bit of pressure off, but not a massive amount. But yeah, those restrictions are there, and you do have to watch it. I mean, we got quite lucky even in terms of travel that that restrictions had just the tightest restrictions that we were under for the months of 5 months had just lifted. So we were able to travel a bit. Which was a blessing, because, I mean, like you say, if it was 2-3 guys in the woods or whatever, you're fine. But when you've a crew of 15 or 20 people, that's not something you can kind of easily move around. So there was an awful lot of that there, and you are always conscious of it, Yeah.
100%. And how many people were in your crew then? Was it 12 to 15? You said.
I think. Trying to remember the exact numbers now, but it was roughly between 12 and 15. Gotcha. Kind of, we shot over 2 days, so it kind of varied depending on what scenes and what people were needed for.
Of course.
But between 12 and 15, and then you had 4 or 5 kind of cast as well, just to kind of add a bit extra into it.
And there's a lot of moving pieces there, it seems, because obviously there's production for you, and then there's, of course, your actors, of which the previously mentioned Eugene made an appearance, but the costumes were fantastic. That was one of the first things that jumped out at me. Of course, when I moved to Cork initially, not being from here, One of the first things that I did moving down here was I bumped into a buddy for the first time, and he had told me, hey, I do this reenacting thing with UCC. Come on, we'll go over and we'll have a look and have a laugh. And I didn't stick with it. It's not necessarily my thing, but I met a load of people, and I got an appreciation for what goes into the reenacting scene, both from a costume recreation standpoint, from sword mastery, pole arms, all that kind of stuff, and all of this is on display here in this trailer, and it's quite impressive. So I guess the question I have for you there is, was there an awful lot of thought and planning that went into what I guess when you're talking about Avery, you're kind of working off of a spec of sorts, looking at this picture to kind of go, okay, let's try and get that as close as humanly possible. But then for your supporting characters and how they act and how they move and how they fight, I would assume there was probably an awful lot of like consultation and probably because of COVID, a lot of like Zoom conversations or phone calls or whatever to try and like work all of this out ahead of time.
Yeah, it's the Eivor's costume was done by Team Emerald Cosplay. They're a couple of cosplayers in Limerick. So yeah, like you talk about Zoom calls, they were in Limerick. I was here in Tip. Raf Maraca, who did the other costumes and the Druid masks and everything else, was in Cork. And then you had our actors like Sinead, who was up in Dublin. Will, who played the Druid priest, who was in Clonmel. So everybody was all over the place, and you're trying to, like, when it comes to costuming and things like that, I mean, even once you narrow down a design, which was difficult enough because there often wasn't enough material to work off. You can get a full listing of Eivor's costume, but everybody else, was kind of made on the spot or thrown together. Like the Druid masks, myself and Raf are really, really proud of. He made those completely from scratch. And as I said, it was that one sketch that we had to work off, that initial poster, and it was a case of we sat down and we said, okay, well, if we individualize these characters, these Druids, then we'll do it as a hierarchical society. So. We have stag, which is, often a royal symbol.
Yes.
So that's the priest. Then you have the ram, which is kind of strong and powerful, and he's the bodyguard. He's the boss, that little kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then the other masks were individual as well, and it was different things like that. So we had no kind of lead from Ubisoft on that. And I've been waiting to hear whether we'd get any information from them. And then eventually it was a case of, right, we're just going to go our own way. And if it's a case that we get it right, great. If we don't, tough. We've done the best we can. And then as it happened, the day before the trailer released, Ubisoft actually released their own Rat of the Druids trailer. And I think we got it pretty spot on.
Yeah.
We got the animal skulls down and everything. I was like, that was, it was kind of just a case of thinking where you could kind of go with that. But it was very much this kind of complex back and forth between different places and, sending measurements from an actor to a fitter, hoping to God that they actually worked,
hoping to God that they haven't spent the last 3 weeks in lockdown eating, nothing but Jaffa cakes. And,
hoping they really were the measurements that they sent you.
Exactly.
So, and we were lucky in that everything fit. I mean, literally those actors tried on those costumes in most cases the day of the shoot, and that was it.
Yeah. A lot of
good
pieces.
Yeah, there really was. There was a lot of costuming and things like that didn't make the final video because we had another couple of scenes that we wanted to shoot, and there was a lot more kind of material in there. And there was a lot more Viking characters.
Sure.
I now have about half a dozen Viking shields that were there for extras that were on a Viking boat,
Wow.
That's part of why I want to do Siege of Paris, because that stuff has got to be used somewhere.
Oh, it would be a crime if you didn't now, yeah.
But yeah, costuming was the huge element of it.
And sorry.
When it comes to anything that I do, there has to be detail. all the way from Call of Duty up to this, or the Ghost Recon stuff. I really think if the costumes aren't there, it doesn't work. It has to be right.
Yep, 100%, 100%, and it shows. Even in, I think the masks are probably the most striking part of all the costuming. Yeah. But as somebody that has gone to fairs where buddies of mine have painstakingly told me why something wasn't accurate, even now I've taken in some of that knowledge, and looking at what you guys have done there, it was, especially for something that's not been funded or whatever, incredibly well done. So praise to you. And could you name the people that were involved again there? We'll be sure to drop anything that we need down below.
Yeah, so Team Emerald Cosplay, that's Jay and Emily that were in Limerick that did Eivor's costume. Awesome. And then you had Raf Maraka who designed the Druid costumes. Awesome. They all did amazing work. They really, really did. Raf made the altar as well, the stone altar.
Oh yeah,
which is actually just paper mache.
Okay, so it's not stone. I was going to ask you, like, is that like a centerpiece in your garden now?
That is sitting outside my office door for the last month, and everyone else who works in my office block keeps looking at it going, what is that? Why is that
here? Okay, you're that guy. Everybody in the office just goes, oh God. What's he going to sacrifice this week?
Yeah, what's he doing?
Well, I guess just to wrap this up, one of the most, one of the biggest advantages that you guys had coming into this particular trailer is your location, as we discussed before, Ireland. Now, anybody that's been watching this on YouTube and anybody that's listening at home, please do check out the link below. You will see immediately that you are greeted with, like Irish cliffsides. You're greeted with like rolling water. You're greeted with, stags, and ravens and what have you in their forestry. Looking over forts and aerial shots. Like, you had access to the natural landscape of where this would be set. Like, if this was a Ubisoft produced piece, you can guarantee that the first 20 seconds or so would be very similar to what you guys were able to pull off simply by getting in a car and taking that necessary journey. And of course, Ireland being Ireland, everything is reachable. So you really had like this deluge of available spaces for you guys, I'm sure, to shoot. Or if you had it in your head, I know the exact cliff where we can get this shot. You could get there. And I guess when you then talk about, well, if we have timeline permitting, we would love to do Siege of Paris, then obviously that comes with a whole other set of challenges, because not only do you potentially have to work around, well, either we go to Paris or we do it from here, and we kind of, use filmmaking tricks, of course, to give off the impression. But even just from a landscape perspective and everything, is that something that would be quite hard to achieve, or is that just something that, no, that's fine, we would 100% be able to handle that?
Yeah, it's that is kind of the most difficult element of the whole thing is kind of that. And it's very much tied into budget and everything else. So, I mean, I actually, at the moment, I actually have 3 separate ideas for Siege of Paris, all at different kind of budget levels, It's kind of a case of, if we have 0, we'd shoot this. If we have a little bit, we'll do this. If someone suddenly decides to give us a fortune, we'll do this. It kind of varies. I mean, there's always going to be a bit of trickery kind of going on to get that in there, it will come down to budget, but I mean, there's always a way around, and it's something. I mean, like, going back to the Call of Duty one, because there was such a learning curve on that. I mean, we shot in a room in probably one of the greenest parts of Ireland, and yet we managed to get it across as being Fallujah.
Yeah.
So I mean, you can find a way, and there is ways around it in terms of how you do that.
Of course.
I do have a couple of ideas in terms of how we could do Siege of Paris, without ever going to Paris. as much as I would like to, you know.
Well, paper mache. You just got to make a paper mache walled palace. There you go.
I'll tell Raph. He'll be thrilled.
Yeah, he'll be thrilled. Your office workers, maybe not so much. But yeah, I severely look forward to whether it's Siege of Paris or whether it's something else in, you know, my particular favourite medium of choice. I'm truly looking forward to everything that comes from you guys. What you guys have done in terms of the Assassin's Creed Wrath of the Druids trailer and everything that has come before has been wonderful, and I genuinely encourage anybody that may be watching this or listening to this, do go down below into the description. We're going to put, you know, links to all of Darren's work, and Darren will obviously pass on anything to us that could be used for anybody who wishes to share their cosplaying business or whatever it may be. We'll put everything that everybody's cool with down below, so do check it out. But Darren, in the interest of wrapping this up, I do have to say thank you so much for spending the time with us to, you know, just really get in there and ask you, because these are the kind of questions that when I'm watching these things, I'm thinking to myself, God, I'd love to ask him this or whatever. So it's been a pleasure. It has absolutely been a pleasure. Have you got anything that people could look for? Is there anything that you would like to let people know is coming up in the future, or where can people find you in your work?
My site would be daremediaproductions.com. It's at the moment it's kind of a mix of everything. It's a mix of my corporate work, but also the trailers that I'm doing now. I would down the line like to branch out and maybe do a separate site just purely for this.
Sure.
But yeah, I mean, if anybody wants to follow me on Instagram or anything like that, I normally tend to put a lot of behind the scenes photos and cast and crew stuff. There's a big variety and a big mix there. Those are probably the two best places to find me.
Sure.
Our YouTube channel, you'll have the link to there. I mean, there's going to be more and more stuff. It's been nice to have people ask about how these things are made, and thank you very much for having me on, because it's nice to be asked these questions, because it's nice that people kind of do appreciate, you know, a bit of the effort that goes into it.
Of course.
Yeah, like absolutely. If people want to follow or want to take a look and see what we have, I'm hopeful that we can possibly get 2 or 3 more videos done by the end of the year.
Wow.
Be that Siege of Paris and hopefully one other. Still kind of debating what that will be, but
sure.
We'll see where it will go.
Are you taking requests? Because you know, maybe you could do like a Super Mario or something. Really just break out of that box, you know. But no, I really whenever a game is released, I'm always going, what about this? Yeah.
And, you know,
that must be interesting. It's like, could I make something live action out of this? Every time you see a trailer, E3 is going to be quite the show for you.
Oh yeah. Closely followed by my family slapping me saying, no, you can't do that.
It's ridiculous. No, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much, Darren, for your time. As we mentioned, everything of Darren's will be linked down below, and hopefully you guys can go over, check that out. It's definitely worth a watch. My personal favourites, of course, were the Call of Duty video that we mentioned. Of course, there goes Recon work, and then the most recent Assassin's Creed Valhalla, which you have been watching here on YouTube. If you have been with us on YouTube, if you're listening to the podcast, it's all down below. Do check it out, please. But Darren, thank you so much. You're a gentleman. Take care of yourself.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.